Hello and welcome to Agony Aunt and Uncle. If you're listening on podcast, we also are on video doing this very podcast on our YouTube channel, the Sawalha-Adderleys.
Video, that's very analog, isn't it?
That's what they say on
Isn't it
YouTube.
weird?
It's
There's
really
no such
weird.
thing as a video
I know,
anymore.
It's so weird. Yeah, so you can watch us if you fancy over there. Poor Mark is struggling a bit with a cough.
If I have to keep clear on my throat, I do apologise. And if I sound bunged up and nasally and bassy, it's because I am. So I'm sorry.
But that's okay. We're around our kitchen table where the aunt and uncle that you wish you had, that you could just run things by. We are not professionals. We choose the problems that come in carefully, very carefully. And what we do is we just share our experiences. We don't advise. And if you are listening and you think, oh, this has got nothing to do with me, this problem, just listen on, because sometimes we miss the similarities by just focusing on the differences. And yeah, I think there's always something for everybody, don't you, in whose ever problem it is.
Yeah, it's not about because of course no one can have gone through everything everyone else has gone through. So it's not that. But in every problem, I always immediately put myself in the position of, you know, if this was my daughter or my child or my wife or, you know, friend, if this was someone kind of coming to me with this problem, quite literally, what advice would I give based upon the kind of myriad of experiences we've been through as a family? You know, we've lost track of the list of mental health issues that we all share and have and, you know, are struggling through. We've had every conceivable type of therapy apart from the one where they electrocute your head. But, you know, we've done everything. We've pretty much been there, done that, and been around the block. So, and even in the more extreme cases, we also know people who've been through things. So, yeah, I think this is not about providing professional solutions, but it is about a sort of, you know, a shoulder to cry on, to share with, to chew the cud with.
And I suppose rather than advise, what we're doing is we try to listen and just respond. That
exactly.
would be what it is we do here. If this is your first time, and if it's not your first time, you've been listening to us for ages, please do, if you're listening on podcast, like, subscribe, same on YouTube. Right, I'm going to kick off. There's a lot in here. There's a lot in this problem that Mark and I have experience of in different ways. Not exactly, of course, because your experience is your own, but we really felt that this spoke to both of us.
And I'm just looking off to the same letter that we've received, if I'm looking over.
Just have a slurp of water. So, my husband, 40, and I'm 36, have been together for 15 years, married for 10. My husband suffers with depression and is an alcoholic, but sober for 16 years and awaiting diagnosis for ADHD. This June was a real low point where he was hospitalised with his depression, but was able to get on new antidepressants with dopamine in them and has been making progress in his recovery along with his weekly therapist. The problem is that I've recently found out I'm pregnant, which was not planned. Generally, and while I never suffer any sort of depression or anxiety, I've been a ball of nerves since I found out, worrying about the impact of this on our two daughters and the extra workload that I'll naturally carry on a daily basis, because you're also full-time employed. Along with the extra workload when my husband is having a tough episode. And naturally worried that everything is going well with the pregnancy and the baby is healthy and has a heartbeat, etc. Lots on your plate, basically. I've spoken to him about my concerns and he has assured me that this time he will continue with his tablets and therapy as I explain that I've reached my quota of stress, but I'm struggling to believe his promises as he's let me down in the past. I explained that each time I had a child, 3 or 4 months after, he has hit a low point and I need him to take his mental health seriously and do the work this time. I know I can manage the girls myself and the baby, but can't take him on as well when I'll still be recovering from the birth. He assures me that as this is a new tablet, it suits him much better. And when he stopped taking his antidepressants numerous times in the past, it was because his doctor had refused to move him off the old prescription from which he didn't feel any relief from his symptoms. Am I right to have concerns, or should I just let go of my worries and enjoy this new journey? Wow. this spoke to both Mark and I in so many different ways, didn't it? First of all, congratulations on the pregnancy. And straight away, I want to acknowledge that for both of you, what a journey. Together for 15 years, Mark and I have been married for 20. Your husband's sober for 16, Mark's sober for 18. We both have ADHD. Mark has, also suffers from depression. And there's a lot here that I think we really empathise with. So first of all, and you might think this is strange, I just want to acknowledge what your husband has done so far. It's been, it's a lot, isn't it? He's stayed sober. He's been prescribed with the wrong medication over years. That is devastating for both you and him, and you entirely as a family. It's just awful. He and you have been done a disservice by that, especially. It sounds like you had a very unsympathetic GP, and how terrifying for you and for him that he ended up hospitalised with this. So all of that is loads more than most people would have to deal with in a whole lifetime. So my very first thought here is, no wonder you feel nervous at a time that you are pregnant as well.
It's our postman.
That's our postman, at a time that you are pregnant. Now, you say here that your husband is feeling a lot better on the medication, and that he has promised that he's going to stick to his medication this time, and his weekly therapist. So all of these things make me feel, as I'm reading this, a bit safer for you. He's got a therapist. He's made this promise. He's not making a promise on the old medication. He's making this promise on the new medication. So if everything you say that he said is as it is, that is an amazing place to start, because I think both Mark and I would agree those were all the things that we would say that you need to get in place to start feeling a bit safer. What I would add to that is that maybe, I don't know whether you've sat down. It sounds like you have quite a good communication, because it sounds like you've already said to him you're feeling anxious and worried as to whether he's going to maintain everything, and he's answered that he will. But maybe what you could do is just agree that every week, I don't know what you think about this, Mark, that you sit down, you set aside some time, you actually talk about where you're at, because, and Mark will be better on this than I am, but I can definitely see sometimes when Mark is retreating, if he's struggling with his mental health, and that can be the time as the partner of that person that you can also retreat, because you think, oh, what's going on here? Is this something that I talk about, or is this something that I let just pass by because it might just be a little bump, or is it? And I think that when you're pregnant, those anxieties can increase. So I personally think if every week you had a set time where you sit down and you talk about it, and that you make a promise to each other that you're going to be as honest as you can without anybody taking offence, I think that could be a really good security blanket, not only for you, though of course I'm here for you as a woman, but for him, because I also really empathise for him. And there is so much pressure on men, isn't there, in a different way when somebody is pregnant. You've said, oh, I can manage with the kids, I can manage with full-time work, I can manage with the baby. But I would imagine he would want you to also say, and I also want to lean on you. And maybe you're too scared of that, which I can completely understand, because of his mental health. So you'll be in the vibe where you're thinking about all these other people, but you're constantly managing the mental health balance for your husband. And I think Mark would identify with the 3 to 4 month thing. I think we found with our girls, you definitely had a low. I mean, we didn't know at that point that you were bipolar.
Yeah, I mean, it's
interesting.
It's interesting. I mean, because there's so much detail in this. That you've given us a lot, and yet I feel I want to ask so many more questions. about it. Again, you know, I echo what Nadia says. It's an astonishing achievement to stay sober for a day in this culture that we live in. It really is. But I think really a lot of what's going on here, or a lot of what I feel you're describing, keeps tugging me back to the nature of your partner's sobriety, the nature of his recovery and how he stays sober, the extent to which, because, you know, when you talk about this idea of, you know, having been let down in the past and taking drugs and not taking drugs, and I realised that a lot of that was to do with the kind of incompatibility of the right drugs and all that sort of stuff, which Nadia's talked about. There, you know, alcoholism can be active without a drop of alcohol in someone. Sometimes in a more sort of hidden and corrosive fashion. Now, that's not what I'm necessarily saying is happening here, but in terms of what sort of constant care and advice, and I know he's in therapy, whether he's in a 12-step program or what have you, or whether he knows other people who are sober, whether he has other sort of friends who are also fathers. You know, I think it's very hard sometimes for the person who's not an addict or an alcoholic to understand that we can, as alcoholics or recovering alcoholics, sober people who have a problem with addiction, we can still sabotage ourselves, we can still run away from open dialogue, we can still hide, we can still conceal, we can still get secretive, we can still feel shame and guilt and worry. And I think, as Nadia was kind of teeing up there, I think it's not talked about enough, the extent to which having a child for a man is a potentially massive thing. Obviously, there's all the positives. Let's park all the positives to the side. We all accept totally how wonderful it is to have a family, to have children, what have you. But as you sort of mentioned in here, you worry about things as it was really stark when you said, "I worry, has it got a heartbeat?" You know, it's a moment of great excitement, pregnancy and having a baby, but it's a moment of huge fear and a loss of control. And that loss of control is felt really keenly for men, because it's quite literally not happening in your own body. I mean, I'm not saying for a minute that means every woman who's pregnant is in control, not at all. But men are that one step removed even further from even being able to kind of just feel whatever it means to be pregnant. And so I do wonder whether, you know, the extent to which, you know, you felt that he's had this wobble or this step away or this back off or what have you with the other children. And it would make me want to ask more questions about the nature and the ways in which you fell pregnant again. I mean, obviously I know how you fell pregnant, but, you know, where were you at in the relationship? Was it a shared decision? Was it a sort of accidentally on purpose moment? You know, how has this come about? Would you say, and it's not a negative thing to kind of ask these kind of questions of yourselves, is one of you more into having another baby than the other? Was one of you more into having babies than the other? You know, all these things for the alcoholic mind, and this is why I'm sort of coming back in a big circle, is that yes, he's put the drink down and that is brilliant, but it doesn't mean that all of these swishing emotions and conflicting fears and a sense, though not necessarily reality, which is often the case in most relationships, of not being able to voice stuff, not because you're not letting him, but a lot of people will provide themselves with the hurdles to be able to voice things. It's not through anyone else's fault. You know, I write, and Nadia often says this, I write the script of what other people are saying, and often it's inaccurate, it's wrong, it's totally off point. So, you know, the extent to which, yes, there's medication, yes, there's therapy, but also, you know, he may be struggling still, or he might have areas of his sobriety, which makes it difficult for these moments of having babies and the time afterwards. I struggled massively. I mean, and it doesn't come from a not wanting, it comes from a fear of, for me, it was having had 2 children already, ironically, they're not in the same setup as you. It was the fear of, have I got what is needed of me for another living creature in the world, when it's whatever the setup is with the original 2, that's stretching me to full emotional tilt anyway. And I think, going back to what Nadia says, the best option here is to talk, is to have some almost kind of AA meeting between the 2 of yourselves, you know, once a week, where, you know, you don't even necessarily, you know, going back to what we do sometimes with couples therapy, it's not even about cross sharing or talking about what they've said, having a safe space to say exactly what you feel. He'll be conversant with that if he is in a 12-step program.
And also, I don't know if you've ever yourself gone to Al-Anon, which is for the families and friends and loved ones of people struggling with addiction, because then it's a space where it's just about you. Because you can get just swallowed up in another person's addiction and mental health conditions through nobody's fault, but it's just it's necessary when you're just getting on with the day-to-day life to constantly make, you know, allowances and to constantly think about. I mean, like, sometimes Mark gets annoyed with me when he says, like, you know, oh God, does everything have to be put down to my mental health? But actually you do, and I think you might, one does go, well, you know, maybe this is actually because they're feeling this way because of X, Y, Z. It's just what you naturally start, well, I think a nice person naturally starts doing. And that can be really exhausting. And so maybe this is a time where actually, again, looking back to you saying, I can look after the kids, I can do this, I can do that. Maybe you could risk being a little bit vulnerable with him. And maybe in the conversations you could say, do you know what? Reading back, hearing Nadia read out my letter, if you did feel this, you could say, I heard me saying that I'm dealing with everything. What else could you put on your shoulders for me? What could you take? Because that might help him feel more involved and more necessary in the whole thing, rather than you coping and you getting on. You've had to do that. It's been absolutely life-saving. It's been totally necessary. But what if what he says really is true and he feels a lot better on this medication and he feels supported with his therapist? You know, maybe because you've been let down, well, both of you have been let down by misdiagnosis and bad prescriptions, because both of you have let down, you of course, you're not going to trust at this point when you're pregnant, you've got to keep the shit up. But maybe that vulnerability shared with him will let him step up to the plate a bit more. And in case you haven't listened to any of other podcasts before, I just realised neither Mark and I have actually explained what this thing is that they do at so if you've heard this before, I apologise, that they do with in couples counselling, which is you set a timer for whatever time, 5 minutes each, and the other one does not interrupt at all. You're not to say a thing, you just have to listen. And you don't have to, I might sit here, if I was you, and I might say to Mark, you know, I'm just really worried and da-da-da and da-da-da, and Mark wouldn't have to absolutely answer that. He could talk about what he's feeling, or you can answer each other, but you must only do it in your own time. And it's a bit like any exercise. It's like the consistency of just doing it will really, I think, really make a difference. It's worked for us. I wish sometimes Mark and I did it more often. We kind of do it a bit in the podcasts, How to Stay Married podcast. We do, and we do. We have to sit opposite each other for half an hour, 45 minutes and talk about our relationship. Most people don't get that chance, or don't give their relationship that chance.
Can I just
think,
sorry.
And on the last one, am I right to have concerns, or should I just let go of my worries and enjoy this new journey? I think it's in between those two things. I think to say just let go of all your concerns is clearly mad, because you've had this life experience. But I think being able to let go, step in a little bit to the vulnerability. You obviously want to be in this relationship, the two of you. You've gone through lots of highs and lows. And then try and enjoy the journey a bit more together. That's what I would say. And
also, finally, something I haven't really articulated very clearly, but I want to get across is sometimes the amount of time in someone's sobriety can become a real albatross around the neck of both the sober person, but also the person living with the addict, recovering addict, alcoholic. And what I mean by that is, don't allow yourselves to feel the pressure or be, in a sense, starstruck by just the numbers, because there's a huge pressure for the sober person who feels after so long, I should have it all so sorted and I should be able to be walking the walk and talking the talk in every single area of your life. I shouldn't be feeling these things. That's not the case at all. And there's also huge pressure on the partner who doesn't want to be taken away from what looks like on paper is a very, very powerful achievement. So, you know, sometimes it's a great thing, the amount of time one's been sober, but sometimes it can become something within the cut and thrust of the day-to-dayness of a relationship where you're used to sobriety. It can become something that it can almost become a bit of a burden, or potentially a bit of a kind of, it will prevent, say, Nadia from feeling she can be a bit more critical about my behaviour because she doesn't want to take away from what I've managed to do. But, you know, every day of your life as a family struggling or living with sobriety, you know, every day is a new day, and every day will present, you know, different problems. But you will also be using some of the old behaviours in that day, so you will be behaving in an alcoholic fashion. Some days you won't. So it's just be kinder and be more flexible with yourself. Because I think sometimes I do worry about people who are the partners of addicts and alcoholics, almost feeling like it's not nice of them to pull someone up on their behaviour or their attitude or their mood or where they're at, because they've done so well. Look, they've been, and it's true, they have done so well. But
I think it's great to acknowledge that, and yeah, I think that the partners of people that are struggling with sobriety or are in sobriety and struggling with their mental health. I mean, I know I certainly do it. I think, oh God, but you know, I don't have to deal with all of that. And that's good to be like that. But there's got to be a balance where you're also taking into account your own needs, because where there is a recovering alcoholic addict, there is somebody that is rescuing, because that in itself is another whole ballgame. But I would suggest, what Mark's talking about is dry drunk. Like somebody can still have all the behaviours that led them to drink, to suppress those behaviours. And Mark and I will often have these conversations where and if you're in that eggshelly place where you feel like you can't say anything, you know, or if you know all about dry drunk, then, you know, forgive us. But if you don't, maybe read up a little bit on that, and maybe that's something you could bring to the table in your chat with your husband. But please let us know how you get on. If you decide to do this weekly chat, we really love to know how it goes for you, and please do stay in touch. And then also maybe one day we could have a photo of the baby as well.
Oh wow!
Thank you for sharing that. As I said, it you know what's lovely? Another thing that's lovely for us about this podcast is that it brings up to us the stuff that we have worked on, the stuff we've still got to work on. So it's not just like, oh, we're here just like sharing because we're sorted. You feed us back as well, and it's really, I love that.
And the classic case in point there is it's made me not rethink, because one thinks about it, but one gets on with living, don't you? You get on with life, you're just doing stuff. And, it's easy for me to forget sometimes that, you know, what an onerous at times task it is for my partner to have had to be alongside someone who's had to go through all the things that one has to go through to get to 18 years. Yes, we talk about the addict, but also for the partner. You know, for the partner, it's a massive deal. And, you know, you can't deny your feelings in these things. But equally, going back to the thing I was saying about men and babies, and it's a thing. You know, men have fears, men have guilt, men have shame, men have a disconnect. Men get depressed. I swear to God, there is postnatal depression for men too. There's not as much of a physical aspect to it necessarily to them.
To say that it doesn't exist is clearly insane, because it doesn't recognise the deep and huge emotion that goes on for both parents, when it's just that it's not hormonal.
Okay, this one really, this next note, which is very short, or kind of dilemma, if you like, or question, really stood out to me this week for some reason. Hi, Nadia and Mark. I'm 22 years old, male, and my question is to you both this. Did you ever feel lonely when you were in your 20s? Or were you happy in your 20s? And what advice would you give to your younger selves? And then this person also says, it was lovely to have met you, Nadia, too, at Birmingham.
Oh.
I'm not saying much more because you might want to stay anonymous.
It was so lovely meeting people. It really, really was. So if I met you on the Loose Women tour, honestly, we came off stage and we were like, oh my God, how amazing was it to actually meet the audience up close and personal. It was, so thank you. Thank you for that.
Loneliness, 20s. I think the reason, can I just lead quickly with why I thought this kind of really stood out to me? Ostensibly, in my 20s, I was at college for the first 2 years, became a parent. So 21 and 22, I was still studying, ending my first degree, went to film school, 23, had a baby, entered the industry as an editor. 24, 25, 26, relationship foundered, fell apart. We tried to get back together. By 27, 28, had another child. 29, hitting 30. Wow. A lot was going on there. I came across a lot of people. I created two people, partially created two people, put two wonderful people in this world. And so there were a lot of people around me. And yet, when I read this, I thought, oh my God, I was so lonely throughout all my 20s. All of them. It's why I became a father, probably. It's why my addiction took root. It's why probably some of the things that I've discovered embedded the causes of many of my mental health conditions from a much younger age, could become entrenched and be snaked and snake around drinking and drug taking. Workaholism crept in. Constant relationships between the main relationships crept in. Fear.
Do you think you were lonely before that, though?
I
you were lonely as a child?
I was not lonely. That's a really difficult question. I think
you sound like you were lonely when you talk about your childhood.
Yeah, but there were periods where I had lots of friends, but I backed off because they backed off.
Loneliness isn't about how many friends you've got. You can be in a full
No.
room.
I get that. That's what I'm saying. I mean, in my 20s, there were lots of friends. I was socialising all the bloody time, but around all of this, but it was chaotic. So the long and the short of it is, have I ever not been lonely? Probably not. I didn't feel as lonely when I was in my first relationship with Jane.
Sorry, what was that question you just asked yourself?
Have I ever not been lonely? Probably not. I felt least lonely when I was in my first relationship with my first girlfriend. But that was because I felt like I'd found almost a sibling.
Family.
Yeah, family. And so when I read this, I was like, wow. Yeah, because everyone fucking goes on about how your 20s are supposed to be fucking brilliant and exciting and fantastic and wow, go. And it's not to say that there were lots of things in there like that happened, film school, graduating, job, all of this stuff becoming apparent. Yeah, of course, that was all exciting. But actually, it's that funny thing when you look back, oh my God, I felt so alone. So alone.
I think this is an interesting, a really good problem, because I think we sometimes worry, don't we, when we get people like message us and say, oh, like relationship goals or this goals or this goal, that. And we are very honest on our social media and we do talk about a lot of stuff, but we still appear to be, I'm painfully aware that we might appear to be just so sorted and so, and nobody is.
No.
Nobody is sorted. I spend so much time talking to our daughters about how the way that you are feeling when you go into this party, or way that you might be feeling when you walk into the room, the way that you might feel, I guarantee you that if you look around the room and everybody looks totally sorted and totally cool and totally fine, 90% of them are going to be feeling something similar to you, because the whole of so much of life is about an act. Everyone's faking it to make it. And somebody could have 100 friends and be lonely. So loneliness is something that goes on deep inside of us. I think we carry it in us. And like why I asked Mark if he'd been lonely as a child, it's because I very much feel that he has always been lonely. It's something deep inside of him. There is a loneliness in him. It's a loneliness. Like Mark and I could have a moment, like we could have a really lovely hug or a lovely kiss, and straight away he will say something very usually something very sad or something very scary about death or something. And it's him plummeting back into the loneliness. He carries it in him. And yet you could see him on Instagram, you see him on Coffee and Moan, you see him in his life here, and you wouldn't look at him and think that Mark is lonely, but it's nothing to do with people liking him or not liking him. There is a loneliness that is in you. So I think there's that kind of loneliness. I think often people that I've known that carry that loneliness in them like you do, it's often been because that in their childhood they didn't feel loved, or seen or heard. I'm not saying that of you. I'm saying there's just often people with that kind of loneliness. There's been a lack of being seen.
And I think that's why, sorry to cut across that just for a moment, and I think that's possible because it's curious, isn't it? When you look at what's being said, did you ever feel lonely or were you happy? It's not like I'm presuming you're struggling with the nature of what you should be or could be or want to be maybe in your 20s. And I think it's interesting what Nad says there because it's a really difficult dividing line between loneliness and being alone. By sheer dint of experience, I've got used to knowing how I can be on my own. So I can find it kind of quite agreeable to be alone, but then I can be lonely I can feel lonely very fast.
I don't think lonely is necessarily about being alone for you. Loneliness is something that you carry in you, and as I say, I think that's very difficult because there's a lot of work that has to be done and digging up to where that comes from. But on the loneliness of of finding it difficult to make friends and make connections, and if you're a shy person and you feel like the only way to have friends is to be like everybody else, to be loud, I think that's another kind of loneliness. Or if you're an overthinker, and that's caused you to be lonely because everything you do and everything you say, you overthink about it, and then you just think, well, rather than go out, I'll just isolate, I'll just stay at home, rather than have the horror of after going out and overthinking, which is what I used to do. I was very lonely in my 20s. I was a drinking maniac. I drank on my loneliness, I partied on my loneliness, I surrounded myself in people in my loneliness, and I would go to a very dark place where I was the life and soul of the party, or I didn't pick up my phone to anyone. And people would send me messages and they'd be crying. They would write me letters saying, what have I done that you've just completely cut me out and not answered me? And it was nothing to do with what they'd done. It was to do with me needing to shrink back into this place where I could just be lonely and quiet and not have to hide it. So, I too carried the loneliness in me. But if you saw me, you'd go, oh God, Nadia, and she's got like loads of men that are interested and she's partying but I felt lonely and I drank so heavily because I didn't know what to do with that feeling. So my big answer to this would be, try not to allow yourself to be overwhelmed with the thought that everybody else is having the best time of their lives, because so many people are faking it. I am your classic person. Everyone always says to me, oh, but you're always so happy. Oh my God, but you're a good time girl. But oh yeah, I was faking it. It was fake. And on the thing of were you lonely or were you happy, the one thing that fully took me all my adult life to truly understand is happiness is just moments. Nobody is just happy.
But did you know that? You didn't know that in your 20s, though, did you?
I just thought that if I wasn't happy all the time, there was something tragically wrong with my life. And the thing is, happiness just comes in moments through your day if you're lucky.
I think what we need to do, I think there needs to be a campaign to say it's absolutely fine and actually okay to be lonely, because I think the whole thing about loneliness is it's the pressure of others, it's the pressure of appearances, it's the pressure of what people around you in the media, in adverts, it's socially, in institutions. Everything is selling you this kind of community and inclusivity and connectivity and connection.
But I don't know if that's right, because I think there's a difference between being alone, which nobody should be, but the very word lonely means you are unhappy by being alone.
No, but what I'm saying is that I think the condition
we've got to remove the shame from it.
No, but I think that's my point. But I think the condition of loneliness is a very normal condition to feel in a crowd, not in a crowd, in a group, not in a group. It is part of the human condition. I mean, I don't want to start getting all quotey, but we come into this world alone and we leave this world alone. It is us. And yes, we strive to make connections. We have families and all that kind of stuff. If you looked at me in my 20s, wow. He was this go-get-it family man, fat, beautiful kid, had all of this, traveling the world, lonely doesn't even come close to it. And it was in my 20s where all of the kind of, the foundations of what would explode in my face at the age of 34, it's where it was all laid and it's where it was all found. So what I would say to you is, try and take the attack dogs off your own back if you're feeling it in your 20s. You're right, society and socially, there's a lot of pressure. I've heard so many young adults around our kids and some of our kids say, my God, why do they say this is supposed to be the best years of your life? These are narratives. These are fake, fraudulent narratives promoted by a system and a society that needs those myths to be sort of, nurtured in order to get everyone to obediently live their lives in a certain sort of way. It just doesn't work like that. I mean,
I think most people would have periods of loneliness. I was lonely. I was really lonely in my teens. I was lonely in my 20s. I had a lot of loneliness in my early 30s. I didn't have that darkness. I was lonely. I got lonely, very lonely when I had the girls. I think some of the loneliest times were like when I was breastfeeding at night, and I would just feel this panicked loneliness, and when I was tired, and also when I remember when I had our first child, I just felt so lonely. It was terrifying because I just felt I'm not going to be able to do this. I don't know how to do this. I think when you were, before you admitted that you're an alcoholic, terribly lonely time because I couldn't talk to anyone about it. Very lonely times in my menopause because I just felt disconnected from myself. So I felt lonely within myself. That was a weird one. And I'm very lonely around the time of Mark's diagnosis of bipolar. And I think I feel sometimes... Sorry, that's taking me by surprise. Sorry,
don't be silly.
I think sometimes the points that I feel the loneliness most keenly is when I don't know how to, help when you're very low with your own mental health, because there isn't anyone that I can talk to about it that I feel, that I feel would understand. But I've got this amazing capacity to feel that kind of loneliness, and then I'll just snap. And all my life I've kept thinking, will I suddenly drop dead because I can do this thing where I just switch back to being okay? And I've actually realised now, and loads of people in life have tried to tell me, that's not good for you, the way you can do that. But actually I think it's a gift sent to me from God, and actually I do trust it. And actually right here, right now in this minute, having felt very sad a moment ago, I actually do feel fine again.
So we just watched it happen.
You just watched it happen. But I do feel very low. Oh my God, definitely the loneliest times when you're when you are low. Because there's nobody you can talk to about that. You could, if you were having a massive row with your husband or something, oh God, my husband's driving me mad. But you could never...
Because you can't get into the sticky details of it all, you mean? Or...
I just feel I don't want anyone to feel sorry for me or for you. Do you know what I mean? And that makes me feel sad sometimes, because I feel like that's quite sad that there's nobody that I can feel that I would talk to about that, and they wouldn't.
And they'd feel sorry? I think
it's almost like a protective thing of you, and like a pride thing. I don't know what it is. But yeah, because if somebody were talking to me about that kind of struggle, I'd be totally open for listening, but I just don't believe anybody else would be. It's weird, isn't it? I suppose it's still the taboo around mental health.
Right, maybe. Yeah.
You look so perplexed.
Well, no, I'm just trying to think. I mean,
take this bit out.
I do sometimes feel that I never cease to be amazed when I can get to a very deep into a very deep conversation, or conversation can start to move towards a very deep place about this sort of stuff with someone. And then I look up for a moment, and I don't mean like having been going on, I've sort of like taken a sentence into the foothills of something that we would perhaps kind of understand was a problem, or we needed to. And when I look at the person opposite me, they're absolutely like they need an A to Z just to get through that whatever. And that's not a criticism of them.
It's just people don't know. Before we got onto this mental health journey and understanding our own my ADHD, your depression, I didn't know a bloody thing about it. So it's not even like, it's just you can't be bothered to fill in everything.
No.
You know, like I remember when I said to my mum that you had bipolar 2, she goes, oh my God, what, there's a bipolar 1 and a bipolar 2. And I went, yeah, Mum. But it was just her response, like, she knew nothing about what I was talking about. But she thought, oh God, is this another thing where people go, But obviously when I explained it to her, she was like, all right, I said, they're 2 different conditions.
Yeah.
You know, it's not, me just saying, he's got a 1 or a 2. You know,
it's not like a degree.
Yeah, exactly. So I suppose that's what it is. I don't think this is the truth of it. Everybody is getting on with their lives. Oh my God, this bloody door. Wait there, I'll get it. I'm back. This is the problem. Everyone, you know, I think, oh God, everyone's getting on with their lives. Nobody's got time to get, this is such a big subject, mental health and loneliness around. I can't have somebody not completely understand it. That's what it is.
And you'd rather not have the conversation rather than them have a really abridged, not in any way doing justice to the layers of complication involved conversation.
Yeah. And
it's why ultimately we all now need to just say to each other, yeah, I'm fine. False information, nicely expressed.
But why have we gone into all of this in such detail? I think it's because deep in us, we have such a sense of responsibility with who we are out here on social media, and we would never want anybody to think that we are not lonely, we are not this, we are not, because we are. Everybody experiences all these things, and it's part of life's rich fucking tapestry. But people that like I don't know about you, who's sent us this problem. We don't know enough detail about you, or we're thinking about somebody that's lost a partner and their friends have sort of dissipated and people have moved away. And you're talking about that tick-tock of a clock with not another voice to hear you or to hear your own voice. That is another level of loneliness that is agonising, because when I just got really upset about my loneliness, went to that place and then just got back into my life. I have the privilege of doing that. But when you don't have the privilege of a single person you can call, or a single person that is going to call you, that is a kind of pain, and that is just horrible. And that's where I think it takes a village. Just as people, we have to notice the person that nobody ever talks to at work, or the kid that is like kind of a bit in the corner. We have to be more human about that. Invite the person that you wouldn't really invite, because actually they're very quiet and you don't really know them and it's a bit awkward. Invite them, and then when you've invited them, talk to them a bit, because often the shy and quiet person is the person that has the most interesting things to say.
And in answer to your question, yes, I had the ticking clock loneliness in my 20s for swathes of time, and that is hard. It is you know. So even if there's just some comfort in knowing it's very, very ordinary and normal to experience that is kind of what we're trying to say as well.
Yeah. And for those people that don't have a single person, it's unimagining. But there are so many places that you can reach it out to. There are, and it is about pushing yourself sometimes and just, joining something, doing something, forcing yourself to make those first few steps is very hard. But you never know. There might be rewards at the end of it.
And I do apologise. I've had to take a cough medicine so I don't cough all over the end of this podcast. And that breathing is our dog. It's not me. So thank you, everyone.
That's it for us today. Sorry for all the interruptions. I think our door went off like 4 or 5 times.
We'll have trimmed them out, so you won't have felt them as much as we did.
As I say, please subscribe, tell all your friends, like us if you like us, and please do keep sending in your problems. Do we put the link under here?
The link is below.
The link is below.